The Summer Inn at Veruela, the solar eclipse of 18 July 1860, and Aunt Casca and the witches of Trasmoz. Beneath the shadow of Moncayo, a summer in Veruela, 1861. Ignacio Javier Bona López. The ordinances of the Black Cross. The July sun beat mercilessly upon the streets of Zaragoza, turning the cobblestones into glowing embers and the air into a suffocating breath that oppressed the lungs. In the drawing rooms of the bourgeoisie, ladies waved their fans in desperation, while gentlemen, as the common people like to say, sweated buckets. It was that unbearable heat, together with a persistent cough that had plagued me since winter, which finally persuaded me to follow the advice of my good friend Braulio Foz. "Go to Veruela, my boy," he had said, tapping the ground with his walking stick and fixing me with those sparkling eyes that concealed as much wisdom as mischief. "There, Moncayo will gift you its pure mountain air. Every ailment can be conquered within those Cistercian walls, except love, consumption, obsessions, and one's mother-in-law, of course." Braulio, always possessed of the ironic wit that had so brilliantly animated the adventures of his Pedro Saputo, spoke from experience. He had been the monastery's very first guest when, in 1849, the former abbey opened its doors as a summer inn, 14 years after the monks had been expelled during the ecclesiastical confiscations. He described a place where life was 3 times life itself, free and unchained, where nobility and simplicity walked hand in hand, and where the silence of the cloister healed the wounds inflicted by city life. Thus, after a rattling journey by stagecoach along dusty roads winding through vineyards and olive groves, I found myself standing before the imposing enclosure wall of the monastery. Passing through the massive square tower flanked by 2 round turrets, I was immediately enveloped by silence, broken only by the whisper of leaves stirred by the wind. I was welcomed by the administrator of the inn, Don Santiago Sola, the notary of Vera de Moncayo, a kindly man of calm manners, who assigned me one of the former monastic cells in the upper cloister. "Remember, sir," he warned with a knowing smile, as he handed me a small pamphlet published by El Saldubense and printed in Zaragoza by Vicente Andres. "Here we follow the ordinances to the letter. On your second day, you will receive the customary courtesy visits between 11 and noon, and every afternoon it is an unbreakable law that everyone must attend the general gathering beneath the Black Cross." I sat upon the austere bed in my cell, illuminated by a shaft of sunlight filtering through the pointed Gothic window, and opened the booklet. It was a delightful satirical work, a collection of the unwritten rules governing that emerging bourgeois summer society, almost certainly penned by the sharp wit of Braulio Foz. It began with a humorous ballad. "Every ailment may be cured by Veruela's mountain air, save for love, consumption, madness, and the mother-in-law." Don Pedro of Atares, after surviving a dreadful bout, founded this holy house in a year, well, whichever it was. I laughed aloud in the solitude of my room. The verses continued by telling how Don Pedro, lost in a wild forest amid a storm of rain and hail, vowed to build a monastery should he escape alive, and indeed, he fulfilled his promise. He survived, and soon there rose the mighty church, the cloister galleries, the great tower and enclosing walls. What cloisters, what corridors, what walks, what avenues, what peaceful shade. Even July burns cool beneath it. The poem also contained sharp barbs aimed at the local peasants, warning visitors about the wary young women of Tarazona, who had learned to distrust wealthy gentlemen from Zaragoza. "Those gentlemen," an old woman says, "who come from Zaragoza, pity the foolish girl who believes them. They're rich, and afterwards they leave, while you remain. When I was young, well, experience has taught me." Following the poem came the famous Ordinances for the Guests of Veruela during the summer season. Their preface, signed by the first guest who came here in 1849, recalled that inaugural season as one blessed by harmony, goodwill, and simplicity. Some regulations were as amusing as they were practical. Article 3 declared, "Should anyone wish to dine at the hours kept in France by stockbrokers and informers, he may do so with complete freedom, but he shall be noticed. And should he boast, saying, 'I dine in the French fashion,' he may be answered, 'You dine like an egg.'" Article 4 instructed, Newly arrived guests shall not be visited until their second day, unless they are relatives or personally recommended, so that they may rest, arrange their room, wash, and settle in. Courtesy visits shall take place between 11 and noon. Article 7 established the Golden Rule. Walk wherever you please, but upon returning, everyone must gather beneath the Black Cross for the general conversation, and if nothing else, at least greet those assembled. There were also warnings against professional gamblers who wandered from fashionable spas to fashionable spas. Article 14 advised, if one of those who frequent bathing resorts and crowded summer places should appear proposing games of chance, pretend not to hear him, then bid him good night, even if it be 6 in the morning. Other curious regulations govern dealings with local farmers, forbidding excessive bargaining, while warning visitors not to allow themselves to be cheated by traveling merchants. The 4 days passed in idyllic peace. I observed the ordinances faithfully. I wandered through the Barranco and the Prado Largo, drank the crystal-clear waters of the Huicha River, descending from the heights of Moncayo, and quickly became part of the communal life of the inn. Each afternoon, the shade cast by the great stone Black Cross became our open-air drawing room. There, seated upon its broad steps, gentlemen in loosened frock coats and ladies lazily storing their fans exchanged anecdotes, read newspapers that had arrived days late from Zaragoza, and laughed at the unfortunate souls roasting beneath the city's relentless sun. Yet beneath the laughter, beneath Braulio Fawz's satire and the tranquil rhythm of bourgeois life, Moncayo concealed far darker secrets that would soon cast a shadow over that unforgettable summer.
The Eclipse, the Cliss, and the blood of Trasmoz. It was during one of those peaceful gatherings beneath the Black Cross that I first heard them spoken of. More precisely, I heard of the tragedy that still stained with blood and shame the name of nearby Trasmoz. We were seated in a circle. An elderly gentleman, Don Anselmo, whose white side whiskers framed a solemn face, recounted an encounter with a suspicious-looking peasant woman on the road to Ayllón. "The village girls are prickly enough," he observed, sipping his red wine. "The pamphlet tells us so. A man merely attempts courtesy, and they answer with insults." "Careful how you speak of the women around here, Don Anselmo," interrupted another guest, lowering his voice and instinctively glancing westward, where the slopes of Moncayo darkened beneath the descending evening. "Especially if they come from Trasmoz. Remember what happened last summer." At the mere mention of that village, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Silence followed, dense, heavy with guilt. No one wished to name it aloud. "Of the witches of Trasmoz, who inherit their craft from one another, speak no ill, for they take revenge." Braulio had just joined the gathering and recited the old verses with a smile. "As for me," he added, "if ever I meet one, I give her a kiss and a silver peseta. That way I'm perfectly safe from enchantments." Everyone laughed, but Braulio's own laughter soon faded. He sat beside me, and his cheerful face grew unexpectedly grave. In a low voice, he explained the truth. Trasmoz, he said, was Spain's only cursed village, condemned for centuries because of its ancient disputes with the monks of this very monastery. Its ruined castle was said to host witches' Sabbaths. Yet reality, he warned me, was far more terrible than any tale of sorcery. Last summer, my boy, in July of 1860, fear and ignorance claimed an innocent life. She was no hideous old witch from a fairy tale. Her name was Joaquina Bona Sánchez. She was 46 years old, married to Tomás Pérez, and the mother of 4 children. People called her Aunt Casca. She was a healer. She knew Moncayo's medicinal herbs. She prepared poultices for aching joints and infusions to reduce fever. She tried to help her neighbors. But July of 1860 was unlike any other month. It was the month of the Cliss. Braulio reminded me of what had happened. On 18 July 1860, Spain witnessed a total solar eclipse. Europe's scientific community mobilized as never before. Astronomers from Spain, including Eduardo Novella, as well as France, England, and Russia, traveled to Moncayo, setting up improvised observatories equipped with telescopes and the latest photographic instruments to capture the solar corona. To scientists, it represented a triumph of modern astronomy.
To the peasants of the region, however, it foretold the apocalypse. On the morning of 16 July, Braulio recalled, 2 days before the eclipse, a storm of biblical proportions struck Moncayo. Thunder crashed against these monastery walls as though the mountain itself were splitting apart. Then, on the 18th, when the moon swallowed the sun and darkness descended upon the fields in broad daylight, panic seized the countryside. Dogs howled, hens returned to their roosts, women knelt weeping in the dust, convinced the world had come to its end. Men clung to their doorframes, staring into the blackened sky while whispering in terror, "What will become of us?" They called the eclipse the Eclipse, and in their fear they searched desperately for someone to blame.
When storms ruined the harvests and terror spread through the village, Braulio continued, gratitude toward Joaquina turned into suspicion. Suspicion became fear, and fear, fed by the darkness of the Clees, transformed into pure cruelty. In the early hours of 30 July, scarcely 12 days after the eclipse, a group of villagers from Trasmoz, blinded by popular hysteria and superstition, cornered Joaquina. There was no trial, no mercy. Driven violently from her home, she fled toward the cemetery. She was beaten, accused of witchcraft, accused of causing the storms, accused of making children ill, accused of bringing about the eclipse itself. At last, she was hurled into a deep chasm beside the cemetery overlooking Moncayo. She died so suddenly that the parish priest, Don Agustin Garcia, was unable even to administer the last sacraments. The story struck my heart like a shard of ice. 2 days later, I walked alone toward Trasmoz. The path climbed gently between scrubland and scattered rocks that seemed to conceal ancient secrets. As I approached, the silhouette of the ruined castle against the darkening sky sent a chill through me. I no longer imagined sorcerers raising walls in a single night. Instead, I pictured a mother of 4 children, hunted through darkness, sacrificing her life because an entire village had feared an astronomical phenomenon. Suddenly, around a bend in the path, I encountered a bent figure, a middle-aged woman. Her worn black garments blended almost perfectly with the landscape. She was gathering herbs into a wicker basket. Her weathered face lifted toward mine. Her eyes were dark, penetrating, intensely alive. Remembering Braulio's words and Joaquina's fate, I removed my hat. "Good afternoon, madam. May God keep you." She studied me in silence for several long moments. "Good afternoon to the young gentleman from Zaragoza," she finally answered in a rough voice. "Have you come to cure your ailments with Veruela's air?" "Indeed I have. You have chosen wisely. The waters of the Huecha cleanse the body, but Moncayo is ancient, and much blood lies hidden within its roots. Be careful what you think you know about us, young sir. When the heavens grow dark, people here do not look toward the stars. They look toward their neighbors, searching for someone to blame." I slipped my hand into my waistcoat pocket, withdrew a silver peseta, and offered it to her, remembering the old ballad. "Please accept this, so that you may buy yourself something to brighten your day." She accepted the coin with hardened fingers. There was no kiss, of course, but something softened in her gaze. "The people of Trasmoz are not monsters, young sir. We are merely heirs to a curse we never asked for, and victims of fear of what we cannot understand. Go with God." She turned and disappeared slowly into the gathering dusk. I returned to the monastery with a heavy heart. That night, alone in my cell, I listened to the wind howling through the cloister galleries. It seemed to carry with it Joaquina Bona Sánchez's weeping, the thunder of the Clees, and the echo of a story that refused to die. The true tragedy required neither flying broomsticks nor pacts with the devil. A solar eclipse, a handful of violent storms, and the boundless cruelty of frightened human beings were more than enough. Ignacio Javier Bona López.
The end of days is upon us!
God have mercy on our souls!